Welcome to Colorado Law and the UN Secretariat on the Permanent Forum's celebration of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. As is traditional in Indigenous communities, we will have an invocation by a traditional person, Doug Goodfeather. Doug Goodfeather is Wiyaka Washte from the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, home to Sitting Bull. He's a Lakota speaker, a spiritual man, an Iraq war veteran who served 2 tours, a stage and screen actor, and an international cultural ambassador, and a Grammy Award-winning Lakota singer. Welcome, please, Doug Goodfeather.
Good morning, everybody. I feel so underdressed. They gave me an interpreter, but back home they call them interpretators. But I'd like to say thank you to being asked to come here, to do the opening prayer, and to stand before you is an honor. So before I say the prayer, I'd like to say a few words about this endeavor you guys, all of you that are embarking on, that has been from our past history, moving forward to today and in our future. And the Declaration is very important to our Indigenous ways and our people. You know, I always talk about one of the longest journeys we can make in our life, the mind to the heart, the power of the spirit of who you are, the innate knowledge you bring from the spirit world. And we're born in this world. We become a part of this world, and that makes us all indigenous to this earth. And so when we continue this journey, and our purpose comes up, and we stand before this purpose to prepare our lives to embark this purpose on this earth. It becomes our journey. And this journey, we cross paths with many nations. And everything that we learn comes from our foundation of our traditional ways, our elders. We must always never forget our elders, the teaching of our elders, because they have taught us how to be the warriors of today. They have taught us what to fight for, our languages, a way of prayer for our future generations, because it's so important to the ecosystem of this life, of this world, of the Indigenous. They say that when you go to the redwoods and you see the trees, and when the rain drops on it, it doesn't just feed that tree. The tree takes the water all the way down, and on the bottom, there's baby redwood trees, and she nourishes them first. See, this is the importance of how we think Indigenous and how we carry this on for our future generations. It's important that we see each other as human beings, to embrace each other, because we come from a spiritual way and we share a lot of similarities. No matter where I've been in this world, I prayed with many people in many Indigenous ethnic ways. It didn't matter. Their breath, their rituals, the way they prepared for ceremony, there was something similar to my way, to our culture. From on the other side of the world, how did our relatives say, Mitakuye Oyasi? How important was that? For hundreds of years before we were colonized, they said, Meitakuye Oyasi, after they prayed. And that means we are all related. We are all relations to all life. How do they know that? How do they know these things? Because it's the innate knowledge we bring to this earth. I always talk about the many warriors that God has created on this earth. And sometimes we overlook. One of them is the eagle. One of them is the butterfly. Today, we carry that kind of power here. They say the butterfly's wings can create a tsunami, a hurricane. The eagle watches us from above, protecting the people, because he can see the first light of day. And he carries, and every feather that is on him is a virtue that we must earn today. And sometimes you see the good deeds bonnets the elders wear, sometimes all the way down to the ground. And they have earned those because they love their people. They love their ways. They carried them for our future generations. And they took them off and they put them on the next generation. And I see that when I stand before people and pray, when I'm asked to do this, and sometimes I prepare before I come. Why is it me that they ask when anybody else is just as important? Because it is a purpose that we're all put in someplace to reach each other in this way of life. The journey, the mind to the heart of who you are. The mind is powerful, but the memory and the innate knowledge you come with is here, the spirit. Always look to your heart to stay truthful. We all made an oath to our children, to lives, to your work, your endeavors, education, your law, practice. Now you are the warriors. You are God's warriors, because you're going to be sent out to the forefront and the front lines to battle for our Mother Earth, for our ways of life, so that our children can know these languages and how beautiful they are and how important they are to the ecosystem of this world. See, as human beings, we always differentiate and we always lose track of who we are, and because of the society of what's going on today. But I think sometimes it has to remind us, because what we go through in our lives has molded us to be who we are today. And what are we going through here today in this time and era and all these things that are happening? We have to go through it, and we can't fear it. We must stand up and be strong and use our ways to fight back. Not to hurt, but to teach, to reach out. Because we have children coming yet. They're coming from the star people. They're on their way. People need you to do what you're doing today. People look forward to you, what you're doing. They need you to be at the forefront of this fight for our Mother Earth. One day, our Mother Earth will stop and put us in check. We don't want that. We need to be worthy. We have a responsibility, a purpose. 2 days that are important in our lives: the day you're born, the day you find out why you're born. So, on this earth, our ultimate journey, no matter what color you are, no matter what language you speak, we're all heading to that ultimate journey. One day we're going to cross it. But until that day comes, make this life a good one. I don't know where I would be without my language, my way of life. I'd be homeless. I'd be lost. It is because of these ways I'm standing here. And it's because of these ways that my children know what they know today. It saved my life. So in a spiritual manner that we walk with all creation, with all of life, let's put our hearts and our minds together to make it one powerful prayer. You know, there's a reality and there's a spirituality. In between, they call it the quantum. They accept each other. We always get lost and push it away. Even the smell of sage burning can bring us back to our ways, sweetgrass, our medicines, the sounds of birds. You heard maybe when your grandpa or grandma were telling you a story, brings you back to those ways. That's how important they are. It's so important. Because they are the foundation of who you are. So, let's put our hearts and our minds together and make a good prayer, a good journey today, tomorrow. And that all your loved ones will feel this. People that are in a hospital that will give anything to be sitting here with you. Warriors. The less fortunate. Everything. Wa tonkashila wa kantaka betukile wo pila chiche. Dagni hemacha shnio khan lechisia. Mashipi na hoy machi, mashipi cha. Le ekje vichasha hemacha. Abetuki wa khan gahipi wo pila tanka chichi apelo. Oyale oyateki wian vichasha. Oyale chehi huni pikine ta kuki washi chupikile. Aungla kapiki. Namoasha kekupo. Unchima kha meni wichoni ki ono kiksu yapi. Oya waza kapi kakiji hunkipshni. Maza tipi na waza ka tipi. Yukpi. Uchozani wokia peti washte yu hapi kitelo. Okantaka tugashila. Okantaka unchi. Okantaka makasi domnia. Okantaka unchima kha. Wahechizya. Abetuki washte yukpikte. Namakankte. yo, hey, yo, hey, hey, yo, hey, hi, hi, yo, hey, yo, hey, hey, yo, hey, hi, hi, hey, hi, yo, hey, ho, Yahweh, Yahweh, hey, hey, hi, Yahweh, yo, hey, hey, yo, hey, hi, Yahweh, yo, hey, hey, yo, hey, hi, hey, ho, yo, hey, ho, yo, Yahweh, Yahweh, hey, yo, hey, hi, Yahweh, yo, hey, hi, yo, hey, hi, Yahweh, yo, hey, yo, hey, hi, hey, ho, yo, hey, ho, yo, hey, hey, Tonkashila, Opila, Chicha, Pelo. Mitaku, Yoyasi. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to introduce University of Colorado Provost Russell Moore.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an honor and a privilege for CU to welcome all of you to Boulder and to our campus to mark the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's a personal privilege for me to welcome you to campus as well. And it's an honor for the institution to co-host this event with the Secretary of the United Nations on the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Over the next 2 days, I wish you all the best with the important work that you'll be doing on our campus. And I really look forward to some productive conversations. We have an ethos on campus where everything we do is trying to center on positively impacting humanity. And I think this is an exemplar of the work that you're all doing here for the next 2 days. So as is the case, I think welcomes are best when they're brief. So once again, welcome to the University of Colorado. And again, I wish you all the best over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Moore, for being here. It is now my pleasure to introduce University of Colorado Dean James Anaya.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Provost Moore, for that welcome, and Doug for that wonderful blessing to put us in the right frame of mind. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this gathering at the University of Colorado Law School to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. 10 years ago today, the world went from an era in which the Declaration was just an aspiration to a time when now it is officially part of the global system for the protection of human rights. The picture you see here is taken, or was taken, at the precise moment of the vote on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I took this picture in my with my newly acquired first generation iPhone, which, like the generation, was born in September of 2007. Yes, I did stand in line for the iPhone. Quite a few others who were in the General Assembly Hall at the time of the vote are also in the room here with us. And we'll be hearing from them over the course of this gathering about the decades-long effort to see the Declaration adopted by the General Assembly. You can see the vote tally on the board in the General Assembly Hall, listing the countries from across the globe that voted in favor of the Declaration. It was 143 in favor, 11 abstentions, and 4 against. The United States was among those casting negative votes, along with Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Eventually, however, each of these countries reversed their positions. They reversed their positions and statements that were somewhat qualifying, but that nonetheless provided official alignment with the Declaration's essential terms. The Declaration is by no means a perfect instrument, and for many, it is a disappointment because it assumes that the place of Indigenous peoples will continue to be within the basic architecture of existing state power. Yet, even with its limitations, the Declaration envisions new arrangements and political ordering that follow the arc of history, sluggish as it may be, toward a more just and humane world. By its explicit terms, the Declaration acknowledges and turns its back on the oppression and denial of basic human rights and democratic freedoms that Indigenous peoples have suffered and continue to suffer in many ways. Premised on this recognition of historical and ongoing inequities, the Declaration motivates reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and provides a guide for steps in that direction of reconciliation. It does so by broadly affirming the collective and individual rights of Indigenous peoples, while calling on governments and international institutions across the globe to work collaboratively to see those rights reflected in the everyday reality of Indigenous peoples. By its very nature, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is not itself legally binding, as the lawyers in the room will tell you, but it is nonetheless an extension of the commitments and legal obligations assumed by UN member states to promote and respect human rights under the United Nations Charter, customary international law, and multilateral treaties to which the United States and a majority of the world's countries are parties. And whatever its precise legal significance, the Declaration embodies a convergence of common understanding about the rights of Indigenous peoples upon a foundation of fundamental human rights, including rights of equality, self-determination, property, and cultural integrity. It is a product of more than 2 decades of deliberations in which the experiences and aspirations of Indigenous peoples worldwide, along with failures and successes of relevant laws and policies of states, were closely examined with a view toward promoting human rights. The Declaration envisions a future in which the countries of the world embrace and uplift Indigenous peoples on fair and equitable terms, with effective recognition of their right to exist as distinct peoples in harmony with societies that have grown up around them, free from social and economic disparities rooted in histories of mistreatment. Realization of such a future in the United States and other countries could only serve to further the values of equality and democracy that these countries profess. As we now ponder the possibilities of a genuine process of reconciliation, it is obvious that history cannot be undone. But the future can mark a new direction. And it is thinking around that new direction that motivates this gathering. As we celebrate the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples 10 years after its adoption, we are yet to see the realization of the future to which it aspires. Steps toward reconciliation in many parts of the world have been made, but the terms of the Declaration remain largely unfulfilled. This gathering, thus, is only partially a celebration. More importantly, it is a reflection on the challenge of fulfillment that still lies ahead. It's a great honor for the University of Colorado Law School to co-host this event with the Secretariat of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and we're grateful to the United Nations for this opportunity. Having this event at Colorado Law School allows us to advance our mission to educate, to be a platform for the development and dissemination of knowledge, to challenge the status quo, and, as the Provost said, to have a positive impact on humanity. This event is also a notable example of our dedication specifically to addressing issues concerning Indigenous peoples, including through our American Indian Law Program, which was the main driver in putting this event together. We are pleased to welcome guests from around the world, including many who participated in the development of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We also have the rare privilege of welcoming members of each of the United Nations mechanisms that exist specifically to address Indigenous issues. These include members of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I'd like to recognize them. If you're here, please, I think you are, raise your hands. Mr. Les Melisar and Les, where are you? There he is. And Tarsilia Rivera. And also members of the United Nations Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the chairperson, Dr. Albert Barume. And one of the most recent members, our own Professor Kristen Carpenter. And with us is also the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Ms. Victoria Talley-Capuz. And I'm pleased to welcome the Chief of the Secretariat of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Ms. Chandra Roy Hendrickson. And Secretariat Staff Member Brody Sugardarson. Brody, welcome. And finally, I'd also like to acknowledge several individuals and institutions that have helped to make this event possible through their sponsorship and generosity. We're grateful to count on the Native American Rights Fund as a presenting sponsor. The Native, and its longtime executive director and founder, John Echohawk, is with us today. Welcome, John, as well as other members of NARF. As most of you know, NARF is the premier nonprofit law firm advocating for Indian nations in the United States. NARF is located here in Boulder and has been a longtime partner of the University of Colorado Law School. Our American Indian Law Program and NARF are currently working on a project together, a major project to implement the terms of the Declaration in the United States. Other sponsors whom we would like to thank are Sam and Vicki Dazo, Woon Ki Lau and Margaret Choi, Ron Sangren, Larry Farron, the law firm of Burke Hill, the University of Colorado Office of the President, Diversity Grants, the University of Colorado Center for Native American Indigenous Studies, and the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business Center for Education on Social Responsibility. Again, welcome all of you to the University of Colorado Law School. It's a thrill to have you here with us, and I hope you all enjoy these 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Anaya. And finally, I'd like to bring to the stage the Chief of the Secretariat of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Ms. Chandra Roy Hendrickson.
It's very good to see you all here. So very warm welcome, and thank you all for being with us today. To start off with, I was very much touched by the words from our brother who spoke so movingly of how it is the Great Spirit that unites us all and also guides us. And that is what we are hoping and praying for as we go forward in these next 2 days. It's a great privilege for me to be here with you today. As James and I have pointed out, today is remarkable because at the UN you had for the first time a declaration that was adopted. And I'd like to thank the Provost for also welcoming us here to this beautiful campus. It's really lovely to be here, it's so serene. But more than anything, I think what is important is that it is the institution that welcomes us and provides this space for Indigenous peoples to all come together at a different environment, a different space that gives us the opportunity, but also the time for reflection, and that is a very important space for us. And to thank, of course, our friend James Anaya and Carola Fredericks for having organized this. But more than anything, I'd like to thank the original inhabitants of this land and to recognize Chief John Echohawk for welcoming us and letting us be here today, because this is, for many of us, a very emotional, a very powerful, and yet a very compelling moment to be here. I speak on behalf of the United Nations. As you saw, it's a very, for many of you, as you know, it's this very big building in New York on the East River, but more than anything, it provides this forum where many Indigenous peoples come to make their addresses to the member states, because it is the member states that actually direct and guide the work of the UN. Distinguished representatives, distinguished elders, chiefs, friends, brothers and sisters, it's a great honor to be here today and address you on this, the exact day when the adoption of the declaration was taking place at the United Nations. We're very pleased to be co-organizing this event with our co-host, the Colorado Law School University, and we're hoping that this will also mark something that we can carry forward in the future as well. It is powerful to be here today, and that I'm sure I speak for many of you here who have been working tirelessly to have the declaration adopted, but also it's very encouraging to see lots of young faces here who will be able to carry on the work and will perhaps take the inspiration from some of the work that was already done, but build on that, improve on it. As I was just looking at Jim's picture that he took with the first generation of iPhones, and I was just thinking, wow, in the new generation now, my daughter has one, and they're fantastic. You just look, click, and they have the dynamics, the dimensions, everything. It's high definition. So we're looking forward to having the younger generation provide this high definition to the work that already has been done as we move forward. We have a lot to celebrate, and for that, it is something that we will have to take heart from. As Professor Anaya pointed out, it is partially fulfilled, and either you look at the glass as being half empty, or you look at the glass as being half full. I am an optimist, and I would like to think that it is half full, because after all, we do have a declaration. And the 20 plus years that took in preparing the declaration were not easy. We are all here because Indigenous peoples, you made it happen. The UN, and I speak on behalf of the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, where the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum is housed, the UN was not responsive to Indigenous peoples in the beginning. And as many of you know the story of how they had Indigenous leaders who came from different parts of the world to the UN, stayed there for months in Geneva at the time to try to address the League of Nations as it was then. They did not get a voice. They did not get a hearing. Yet today, at certain peak times of the UN, when you have the Permanent Forum in session in May, you have the MRIP in Geneva in July, you have Indigenous peoples coming to the UN, and the UN receives them, welcomes them. We do our best to make sure the doors are open and that there is space for all of you to come in, and we hope that this will continue. Many of the Indigenous peoples who are here today had the vision, the strength, and the commitment to look forward, not to where we were when it was 2007, but look forward to where we want to be. The UN, for instance, now has taken some steps forward. As Jim pointed out, Professor Anaya, Dean Anaya pointed out, sorry, you have many hats. As Dean Anaya pointed out, we have the three mechanisms, and it's a great privilege to have the expert members here and the special rapporteur, the permanent forum, which is our parent body, the one that we work with closely. And you also have other events that have taken place at the UN. One of them was in 2014, when you had the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. The World Conference on Indigenous Peoples is how it is known, but it was basically a high-level event, because at that time from the UN, that is what they could do. However, the World Conference provided certain benchmarks for the UN. One of them was building on the process that had already taken place in terms of the declaration drafting, where Indigenous peoples worked side by side with member states, with the help, of course, of NGOs, civil society, and the UN special agencies. And this too was carried forward. So you had, during the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, both for the modalities resolution, as well as for the outcome declaration, outcome document. Les Malazzo, in fact, was one of the facilitators, advisors to prepare the outcome document. And this provided a benchmark. From now on, if there is Indigenous events that take place, Indigenous peoples must be part of it. They must be involved, they must be engaged. And this was also taken forward recently when they have this process on participation of Indigenous peoples, which you'll hear more about. And it was Dr. Claire Charters who's been part of that process, along with Dean Anaya and 2 member states. So this provides a benchmark. We have Indigenous peoples and member states working together. And they prepared the outcome document, which basically reiterates, reaffirms, re-endorses the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but places it in the context of how to make it happen. This in itself was a recognition from the United Nations that the declaration needed a fresh impetus, a fresh momentum to make sure that it was being implemented, being applied, and being activated on. As I mentioned, this did not happen organically or by chance. It happened because Indigenous peoples lobbied, advocated, struggled, persuaded, argued, and made sure that these things did happen at the UN. And this is the strongest message that we receive at the UN when Indigenous peoples come there and they are together and they speak as one voice. With one voice, one key message, one key request, the UN tries to do what it can to respond. And in that vein, you recently had the Paris Climate Agreement, and there too you have Indigenous peoples included, reflected in the documents that came up, and you have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I hope some of you have heard of that. This is going to be defining the next 14 years for the UN and the global agenda. The 2030 Agenda actually recognizes the fact that in the earlier Millennium Development Goals, Indigenous peoples were invisible. There was no mention of them. And in the Sustainable Development Goals, there are specific references in Goals 2 and 4, and the key message is leave no one behind. So Indigenous peoples have been speaking out, they have been going to these events and fora, and making sure that their voices are heard. So we have all these achievements. We also have from the United Nations a system-wide action plan to implement the UN Declaration. And this is a commitment which was agreed by the heads of agencies of many of the UN agencies that you work with at the country level in different parts of the world, UNDP, ILO, Office of Human Rights, UNESCO, UNICEF, UN Women, etc. So there is the system-wide action plan to implement the UN Declaration, which has been agreed, adopted, and is now being put into action. Yet, we still have high levels of poverty. We have illiteracy among Indigenous peoples, and more than that, we have illiteracy in Indigenous languages. For instance, I myself am very embarrassed to admit that I'm totally illiterate in my own language. I'm a Chakma. I can speak it. I can barely recognize the writing when I see it, but I cannot read or write it. And I think that is a huge failing on my part, but also recognition of the educational systems that we have. I would like to see in the future Indigenous peoples who can operate in their own languages, as well as in the languages that they need to work in internationally and nationally. I look forward to the 2 days that we have here now, and we will be working together, as Professor Naya pointed out. We'll be looking at what happened, what can we learn from that, and what can we do as we move forward and come up with the next 10 years roadmap so that we know what we want to hope, what we can hope for, but more than anything, what we can achieve. I look forward to working with all of you, and I hope that all the others who are joining us by live webcast are also joining us, not just by being there, but also in their spirit and in their commitment as we move forward and we look to how we can implement the declaration in the next 10 years, so that in the next 10 years, Professor Dean and I can come here and say it has been fully fulfilled and not partially. Thank you all very much. And a warm